No one would have imagined something so shocking on an ordinary Sunday morning. In the quiet neighborhood of Lakewood, Dallas, the Baptist church was filled with families, children running around on the lawn, men and women greeting each other as if they were all from the same house. There, in that place that should be a refuge, an unbelievable scene was repeated without almost anyone noticing. For the third time in 2 months, Linda saw Deacon Mark take Emily, her 10-year-old daughter, into the same door-heavy room down the hall, just after hearing from the girl, a request that still echoed in her chest like a cry of despair. Minutes earlier, leaning against the wooden bench already marked by time, Linda had felt Emily's small hand squeeze hers tightly. It wasn't an affectionate squeeze. It was a fear squeeze. The girl looked down at the floor, her eyes fleeing from any contact, and whispered with her voice stuck in her throat, "Mom, please don't make me sing today." Those simple words tore the air, because the choir had always been the pride of the little one. Seeing her daughter begging like that was like watching a part of her childhood break without explanation. When Mark appeared in the hallway, Bible under his arm and calm smile on his face, greeting each person by name, nothing about him seemed out of place. He approached Emily, lightly touched her shoulder, and said he needed her for a few minutes to practice a special part of the anthem. And once again, the girl was taken to that room at the end of the hallway, away from everyone's eyes. Linda saw her daughter's hands tremble, saw the way she took a deep breath before disappearing through the door. The noise of the lock spinning inside seemed louder than the organ itself playing in the temple. The sounds of worship began to fill the main hall, drowning out any other noise. The pastor started preaching, the faithful opened their Bibles. Some people sang softly, but Linda's heart did not keep up with that rhythm. She couldn't hear the words coming from the pulpit. She only felt a mixture of fear and a kind of certainty that she couldn't explain. It was as if something screamed inside her that there was a secret hidden behind that door, something dark, a hidden truth that could destroy the peace of that congregation. At that moment, Linda felt her whole body tremble. He seemed to see two scenes at the same time. On the outside, the respected man, always ready to help, leading the children in praise. Inside, a shadow she still couldn't name, but which could carry a devastating discovery. The contrast was disturbing. A church full of faith, an admired deacon, a frightened daughter asking to leave the choir. It was impossible to ignore the feeling that something there did not close. She took a deep breath, tried to convince herself that maybe she was exaggerating, that it could just be embarrassment to sing or fear of the audience. But Emily's body didn't lie. The cold hands, the averted gaze, the almost crying request not to return to that room were too strong signs to be swept under the rug. Linda's mother's heart knew, in a way she couldn't put into words, that this morning would mark the beginning of something great, painful, and at the same time necessary. As the voices in the church joined in a soft hymn, Linda sat motionless, staring down the empty hallway that led to the basement. The fear she felt was not only for something bad that could happen, it was also the fear of the truth, of discovery, of what could come to light if she decided to open that door and face what was behind her. Doubt hurt, but intuition hurt even more. She wanted to get up, walk over and turn that doorknob, no matter the cost. But it wasn't at that moment that she moved. Instead, he held tight to the edge of the bench, trying to stay calm, while hard thoughts ran through his head. What if I'm right? What if no one believes me? What if the truth is even worse than I imagine? It was as if, suddenly, the place that had always brought peace had become the scene of a frightening mystery. Something there was deeply wrong, and she knew that sooner or later she would have to face it. The service continued. People stood up, sat down, prayed, sang. Outside, the Dallas sun was blazing the church's stained glass, casting spots of light on the floor. Inside, though, Linda's mind was clouded, heavy. Every minute that passed felt like a weight on his shoulders. The image of the closed door, the sound of the lock, the pale face of her daughter begging not to go, all mixed into a kind of movie that she couldn't pause. When she finally saw Emily return, a few minutes later, with her cheeks flushed in a strange way, and her eyes lost, she felt a lump form in her throat. The deacon's smile as he returned the girl to the bench seemed even calmer, even more secure. He commented something about how Emily had a special voice, a God-given gift, and placed his hand on her head for a second longer than necessary. Linda tried to answer with a polite smile, but inside she felt a chill run down her spine. That Sunday, the feeling that remained was simple and painful. There was a secret in that church, a secret that involved her daughter, a respected man, and a room with a locked door. She still didn't know what it was. She didn't have any proof, no concrete words, just a deep fear, a tightness in her chest, and a maternal instinct screaming that something needed to be discovered. And this presentiment, so strong and frightening, would be the thread that would pull the whole story from there. But to understand how Linda got to this point, her heart in pieces and her faith shaking, you have to go back a few weeks. Back in the day when everything seemed too normal to raise any suspicion, when the church was still just a place of solace, and Deacon Mark was just a smiling man down the hall. Before the desperate requests, before the sleepless nights, before the unanswered questions, there was a common mother-daughter routine that little by little would begin to break down. Linda Miller has always been seen as a strong woman in the Lakewood neighborhood. At the age of 41, he worked in a small local market near a cluster of small houses with simple gardens and narrow balconies. Her car was old, but it still drove her to work and to church on Sundays every day. Divorced for a few years, she raised Emily practically alone, relying only on a few calls from her older sister who lived in Houston so as not to feel completely isolated. Life wasn't easy, but it was honest. The bills were paid carefully, a little at a time, and the daughter was the priority in everything. Emily, at the age of 10, was what many called the smile of the house. A girl with light brown hair, almost always tied in a messy ponytail, big and attentive eyes, she had a sweet way that melted anyone who approached. He liked to draw flowers on loose leaves, to sing around the house songs he learned in church, and to stay close to his mother in the kitchen, inventing stories for each smell that came out of the stove. Since she was a little girl, singing had been her refuge. When she discovered the children's choir at the neighborhood Baptist church, it seemed that she had found a place where her voice could reach a little further. The church was just a few minutes' drive from their home, on a corner with tall trees and a simple sign announcing the hours of the services. On Sundays, families gathered there from early in the morning. Children ran outside, some teenagers leaned against the walls, talking quietly. Older couples walked arm in arm to the main door. There was a smell of coffee coming from a side room, where some volunteers were preparing cookies and hot drinks for after the service. For Linda, this place was more than a building. It was a point of support, a space where I felt I wasn't so alone in the world. It was there that a few years earlier, she met Deacon Mark Johnson. By the age of 45, he was the type who knew almost everyone's name, always with a ready smile and a firm handshake. Married, father of 2 teenagers, he participated in almost all activities, helped organize events, visited sick members, and, among other duties, had taken responsibility for the children's choir. He seemed to be the perfect example of a man of faith and service. Many mothers commented in the corridors how comfortable they felt to leave their children under his guidance. At first, Linda thought so too. When Emily joined the choir at age 9, the sparkle in the girl's eyes filled her mother's heart with pride. She remembered the first rehearsal well. Emily returned home telling how Deacon Mark had told her that she had a special voice, that she needed to be taken care of, that God rejoiced when a child sang from the heart. The girl repeated those phrases as she jumped around the room, and Linda smiled, thinking it was beautiful to see her daughter so excited about something healthy and full of meaning. The Sunday routine was almost always the same. Linda woke up early, before the sun really warmed up, put coffee to iron, heated some frozen waffles in the oven, and left the small apartment smelling like a family morning. Emily would appear in the kitchen in her socks, still half sleepy, but soon she would begin to hum some hymn she had learned. Linda arranged her daughter's hair in front of the living room mirror, carefully pinning small, unruly locks, while the two talked about the past week and who they would see in church. Emily chose with care the dress she would wear. In general, a simple floral dress with a ribbon at the waist, which matched her delicate manner. Linda ran her hand over the fabric, adjusted the hem, and always said the same thing. "You look beautiful, my love, but even more beautiful is your voice when you sing." Emily responded with a shy smile, a mixture of joy and shame, and the room was filled with a tranquility that made her mother believe that despite all the difficulties, she was doing something right in life. They arrived at the church a few minutes before the start of the service. Linda parked her car on a side street from where she could see the simple, light brick building with a small tower and a cross on top. The light wind stirred the leaves of the trees, some birds sang in the wires, and the neighborhood looked like a peaceful movie set. Upon entering, the two were greeted by familiar faces. A white-haired lady asked about Emily, a middle-aged couple commented on the weather, another mother complimented the girl's dress. There was a sense of family there, even without blood ties. Deacon Mark used to stand near the main door, helping to organize the entrance and greeting those who arrived. When he saw Linda and Emily, he would smile broadly, almost automatically, and say things like, "The future soloist of our choir has arrived," or "This girl is a gift to our church." At first, these words filled Linda with pride. She saw her daughter shrink a little, but attributed that gesture to the natural shyness of a child who does not like to be the center of attention. However, as the weeks went by, some details began to bother, even if almost imperceptibly. On one of those Sunday mornings, the smell of coffee coming from the next room seemed stronger than usual. The sound of conversations mingled with the noise of pages of Bibles being turned. And in the midst of it all, Linda noticed the way Mark looked at Emily. It wasn't a quick look of someone who only checks if the child is ready to sing. It was a look that took a little too long, that ran up and down the girl with strange attention, as if it were evaluating something that Linda couldn't define. That look left a small trail of discomfort inside her. It was quick, almost invisible, but Linda's chest tightened for a second. She tried to push the thought away, telling herself that she should be tired of work, that sometimes the head invents things where there is nothing. Still, the image remained. It was like that feeling of walking into a dark room and being sure there's something there, even without seeing it. That same day, after a few songs together, Mark approached Emily just before the main message began. Linda was sitting in the pew with the Bible open in her lap, when she saw, out of the corner of her eye, the deacon lean over to his daughter and speak something quietly, almost close to her ear. Emily looked up quickly at her mother, as if asking for some silent permission. Then Mark explained in a louder voice that he needed the girl for a few minutes to rehearse a special part of the hymn that the choir would perform next Sunday. "It's going to be just the two of us in the music room. In the back, calmer. She needs special attention because her voice is different," he said, in a light, almost playful tone. Some people close to her smiled, finding the care of the child beautiful. Linda tried to match the mood, but at that moment she felt Emily's hand squeeze hers tightly again. The girl made a quick smile without showing her teeth, a smile that didn't match the brightness she used to have when talking about music. It was a smile of someone who is trying to look calm, but is not. Linda noticed that her daughter's fingers were a little cold. She felt a cold run through her own body too. "Is everything okay, my love?" he asked in a low voice, leaning in Emily's direction. The girl nodded, but her eyes did not confirm those words. Still, she got up, straightened her dress, and followed the deacon into the aisle. Linda watched the two walk away, a tall and confident man, a small child with restrained footsteps, and something inside her whispered again that there was something wrong in that scene. For a few seconds, she thought about getting up, going after her, saying that maybe it would be better to leave the rehearsal for another day, that Emily looked tired. But he soon remembered all the conversations in the hallway about how important the choir was, about how confident children grew when they had responsibilities in the church. He remembered so many people speaking well of Mark, his wife always present, the children who played in the youth band. I'm being unfair. He always helped everyone, she thought, trying to calm her own heart. Still, even as she tried to swallow the strange feeling, Linda couldn't help but ask a simple, uncomfortable question from popping into her mind. Why did Emily seem so tense when it came to being alone with the deacon? That question stayed there, quiet, like a small stone inside her shoe, bothering her with every step, but still not strong enough to make her stop. That day, Linda let it go. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a moment, and decided to trust what everyone seemed to see. A man of God taking care of the children of the church. However, her mother's heart did not forget that too tight hand, that averted look, that forced smile. From that seemingly ordinary Sunday, normality began to crack into small, almost invisible spots. And little by little, these small cracks would become too big to ignore. The following Sunday, Linda didn't allow routine to get her on automatic. He woke up earlier than usual, even before the alarm clock rang, with the room still a little dark and the distant sound of a car passing by on the street. She lay down for a few seconds, looking at the ceiling, feeling a different weight on her chest. It was no longer just fear. It was a mixture of fear and a firm decision, a type of courage that was born precisely from the fear of losing what he loved most. He got up slowly so as not to wake Emily right away. In the kitchen, he put the coffee to iron, but this time he couldn't distract himself with the familiar smell. As the dark liquid descended into the jar, she rested her hands on the countertop and took a deep breath, trying to organize in her mind the plan she had drawn up for that day. It would not be an ordinary Sunday. She wasn't just going to leave her daughter in the choir and go up to the service. She had decided that she would stay close, circling the corridors, watching her every move, ready to react at the slightest sign of danger. When Emily appeared at the kitchen door, in her pajamas and scruffy hair, bringing with her the soft clatter of small footsteps on the wooden floor, Linda felt her heart soften for a moment. The girl rubbed her eyes and gave a half smile, her voice still hoarse from sleep. Linda then forced a smile back, as if that day was just like any other, and asked about the dress her daughter wanted to wear. He tried to keep his tone light, but he noticed that the words themselves came out a little slower, as if they weighed on his mouth. On the way to the church, the atmosphere inside the car was different. Emily looked out the window, playing with her seatbelt between her fingers, and said little. Linda commented on the weather, on a neighbor who had changed her car, on a promotion at the market where she worked, all to avoid the silence that seemed more like a guarded scream. When the church appeared in front of them, with its simple facade and small spire slicing the Dallas sky, Linda felt a shiver rise up the column. This time, instead of going straight into the main hall, she offered to help at the reception. The excuse was simple. Some volunteers had commented that they were overwhelmed, and Linda said she could stay at the door for a while, welcoming people, handing out bulletins and smiles. No one was surprised. On the contrary, they thanked him for his willingness. For her, however, this was not just a kindness. It was the way he found to have the freedom to move around the hall, to observe the movement carefully without attracting anyone's attention. As the families arrived, she alternated between greeting people and discreetly looking down the hallway that led to the basement, where the choir's rehearsal room was located. She saw Emily join the other children at the front of the room, near the piano, trying to blend in, but even from a distance, Linda could see the tension in her daughter's body. The way she held the score tightly, the way she avoided looking in the direction where Deacon Mark used to appear, said more than any sentence. It didn't take long for Mark to appear, punctual as always. With a Bible under his arm and a reliable smile on his face, he greeted fathers and mothers by name, made one or two comments about the week, and followed with a tranquility that seemed unshakable. When his eyes met Linda's, he nodded and said something about how Emily was progressing in the choir, how she had a special presence when she opened her mouth to sing. Linda responded with a discreet nod, but inside she felt her hands begin to sweat. She remained at the door for a few more minutes, until she noticed that the children were beginning to organize themselves to go down to the basement. Instead of going up to the service, as she always did, Linda left her post at the front desk, passing the task to another volunteer, with the excuse that she needed to sort out a quick business in the side hallway. She knew exactly what she was going to do. When she saw Mark approach Emily and call her privately, saying that he needed to rehearse a part of her own before the others, Linda's heart almost stopped. His words seemed normal. The tone was the same as always, soft, gentle. But Emily's expression, again, did not match the speech. The girl cast a quick glance in her mother's direction, a look that asked for something she did not yet know how to translate, and then lowered her head, following the deacon to the door that led to the stairs to the basement. Linda waited a few seconds, pretending to arrange some papers on a small table, and then walked in the opposite direction, making a path that would take her to the same place, but from behind. When he reached the beginning of the stairs, he felt the air getting colder. The light there was dimmer, the sound of the service upstairs came muffled, as if coming from far away. She went down a few steps carefully, trying to make as little noise as possible. Each step seemed to echo inside her more than in the concrete. As she approached the end of the stairs, her heart was beating so fast that she wondered if it wasn't possible for someone down there to hear. Before turning the corner of the corridor, he stopped. She was afraid of getting too close and being seen by Mark. He leaned his back against the wall, took a deep breath, and tried to hear any sound that came from the direction of the music room. The smell of light mold, typical of more enclosed places, mixed with the distant perfume of a cheap disinfectant that someone must have used that week. The silence of the corridor contrasted with the distant hubbub of the service. Suddenly she heard something. It wasn't clear, it wasn't a whole sentence, but it sounded like Emily's voice, low, followed by Mark's voice, also low, as if the two of them were very close to each other. Linda tilted her head, trying to make out the words, but everything came in pieces, cut through the closed door. He heard something like, "There's no need to be afraid," and then, "That's just between us." But he wasn't sure. It could be her mind filling in the empty spaces. Still, the body reacted as if it had heard the confirmation of all its fears. His hands became cold, his legs heavy. She wanted to move forward, to run to the door, to knock, to open it, to pull Emily out of there. But something held her back. Perhaps it was the fear of acting without evidence, of being accused of exaggeration, of not being taken seriously if it was all just a misunderstanding. Reason tried to speak louder, saying that it needed to be sure, that it would need something more solid than its own impression if one day it had to explain to someone what was happening. She stood there, leaning against the wall, her head full of questions. The minutes seemed like hours. From time to time, a sound escaped through the crack in the door. A muffled laugh, a loose word, a shuffling of a chair, but nothing that could be used as proof of something wrong. "It's not possible that I'm imagining all this," he thought, his heart sinking. At the same time, I knew I couldn't leave without a clear decision. The scene of her daughter shaking her hand hard that previous Sunday was still vivid in her memory. The feeling that something very serious could be at stake did not let up. After a while, she wouldn't know how to pinpoint. Mark's voice grew a little louder, as if he had moved away from the girl or changed his position. Linda heard a, "Ready? It's great for today, you're going to shine up there," followed by a sound that sounded like a faint applause. Soon after, the noise of the chair dragging and footsteps approaching the door. Linda's heart raced even more. Without thinking twice, she climbed a few steps on her back, fast, but trying not to make a sound, and hid in the curve, where she knew no one would see her if she left the room and looked only at the straight hallway. He heard the door open, the slight creak of rusty hinges, the footsteps of two people coming out and up the stairs. From the sound, he recognized Emily's light gait and Mark's firmer step. He held his breath until he was sure they were already upstairs. Only then did he go downstairs again and walk to the now open door, looking inside the room. He saw the piano in a corner, a few chairs scattered around, sheets of music piled up on a table. It was an ordinary environment. Too ordinary. No foreign object, nothing that in anyone's eyes could light an alert. This apparent normality almost drove her crazy. If someone asks me, what do I have to show? She thought, feeling her stomach churn. Nothing, just the fear of his daughter, his own forebodings, a few loose phrases heard behind a door. It was very little. She knew that if she wanted others to believe, she needed something more concrete, something that couldn't be explained with a smile or a well-crafted speech about vocal preparation and special dedication. When he returned to the main hall, he tried to pretend to be natural. He sat on the bench with the Bible on his lap, but he did not read a single line. I only thought about the scene in the basement, in the hallway, the door closing, the sound of the lock. It was as if the whole church had changed color before her eyes. The walls no longer seemed so welcoming. The sound of the organ no longer seemed so holy. Everything took on a tone of doubt, of distrust. And in the middle of it all was her daughter, small, trying to sing, trying to please, trying not to show the fear she carried. That Sunday, Linda left the church with her head throbbing. When he got home after a silent lunch, he sat on the edge of the bed, took off his shoes and let his bare feet touch the cold floor. There, in silence, he decided something important. It would no longer be enough to observe from afar. It would no longer be enough to feel. To be able to go beyond the hallway, beyond the closed door, beyond the sentences cut by the sound of the walls, she understood that she would need something more than courage. I would need proof. This heavy decision accompanied her for the next few days, like a shadow. On Monday, while Emily was at school and she was returning from the market, Linda sat at the kitchen table with her phone in her hands, staring at the screen, as if she were facing an enemy and a solution at the same time. The device was simple, with some scratches on the back, but it still worked well. She was not a tech-savvy person. She used her phone for calls, basic messages, and some photos of her daughter. That day, however, he decided to learn something new. He opened the browser of his cell phone and began to research, with slightly trembling fingers, how to record audio without the screen being lit. He wrote the words slowly, erasing and correcting until he found videos and texts that explained step by step. He watched everything carefully, pausing, going back, testing on his own device. My heart raced just imagining the scene, the cell phone hidden somewhere near the choir room, recording the voice of whoever was inside. With each test, a question arose. What if someone saw the phone? What if I told you that she was invading the privacy of the church? What if the recording didn't bring anything strange, and all that was just a figment of her imagination? These doubts were not small. They did. In many moments, as I slid my finger across the screen, I felt like giving up and pretending that nothing was happening. Pretending that Emily was just shy, that Mark was just dedicated, that life was simpler than it seemed. But then, as if in a silent response to her hesitations, the image of her daughter curled up in bed on that particular Wednesday came back with a vengeance. She remembered the way Emily trembled, the way she held the pillow so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She remembered the broken voice when the girl said she no longer wanted to be alone with the deacon in the basement. That scene had not been a dream. It had not been an exaggeration. It had been real, and no quick search on mobile would be able to erase this. As she sorted the fruit to put in her daughter's lunchbox the next morning, Linda kept thinking about the plan. He cut an apple into pieces, put cookies in a bag, organized everything in Emily's small backpack, but his mind was focused on another type of preparation. "Where can I hide that phone?" he thought, looking around the kitchen as if there was the answer. I didn't want to put the device in a place where Emily could feel even more pressured or confused. I also didn't want it to be too easy for anyone to notice. An idea came up. Maybe he could leave his phone among the hymnals that were on a shelf in the basement hallway near the rehearsal room. She remembered that wooden bookcase, full of dark-bound books, almost always lined up, but not always used. If he put his cell phone there, with the recorder on, he might be able to record at least part of the conversations. Then another idea appeared, even bolder. What if, instead of leaving the cell phone idle, I put it in the pocket of Emily's own coat? This second option made Linda's heart beat faster. It was riskier. It directly involved her daughter in something that she herself might not understand, but it also seemed more effective. If the device was with Emily, it could capture everything that was said more closely, without depending so much on the walls and distance. On the other hand, the fear of the girl feeling the presence of the cell phone and becoming even more nervous also worried her. As she placed a small bottle of water in the lunchbox, Linda looked at the small image of an angel that was glued to the refrigerator door. It had been a gift from a neighbor years before, with a phrase about protection. That simple figure, drawn in soft lines, made Linda's eyes fill with tears. She didn't want to be in that position, having to hide a cell phone, having to think about evidence, having to be suspicious of someone everyone seemed to admire. But once again, the clear thought came. Her faith was not in the deacon, nor in the institution, nor in an image pasted on the refrigerator. It was in that enormous love for Emily, in that moral obligation he felt to protect her, no matter the cost. This conflict between respect for the religious environment and the need to protect her daughter accompanied her for the rest of the week. As I worked at the grocery store, stacking boxes, passing groceries at the checkout, greeting customers, my mind kept coming back to the same place. The room in the basement, the closed door, Mark's voice, his daughter's pale face. At night, when she went to bed, those thoughts did not let her sleep. He tossed and turned in bed, listening to the distant noise of cars on the street and thinking about everything that could go wrong. What if they catch me? What if no one believes even with a recording? What if I'm messing with something that can turn against me? She asked herself, her chest heavy. But each time the answer came almost immediately, like an internal whisper. What if I do nothing, and I'm right? This possibility hurt more than any risk. The thought of looking back one day and realizing that she ignored her daughter's cry for help was unbearable. Between the fear of judgment from others and the fear of failing Emily, the choice was made by itself. She preferred to face shame, criticism, misunderstanding, than to carry the weight of having kept silent. On Saturday night, as Emily packed her Bible school backpack and sorted out one of the dresses for Sunday worship, Linda sat next to her on the bed and watched her every move. She noticed that the girl avoided choosing the dress she used to wear when she was going to sing more excitedly. He chose a simpler, more discreet model, as if he wanted to attract less attention. Linda wanted to ask if she was nervous, if she had dreamed about the choir, if she remembered anything specific that scared her, but he held back. She knew that the time to ask deep questions was yet to come, and that at that moment her daughter needed to feel presence and security more than to be pressured. When Emily fell asleep late in the morning, Linda got out of bed carefully so as not to wake her, took her cell phone from the dresser and sat in the living room, in the dark, with only the dim streetlight coming in through the window. Opened the recording app once more, tested the buttons, checked if it knew exactly how to start and stop audio capture. He repeated the gesture a few times until he felt that his fingers were already moving almost automatically. Then he leaned his head against the back of the couch and stood there in silence, feeling the weight of what he was about to do. The next morning, Sunday, seemed like any other to anyone looking from the outside. The sun rose with the same color, the smell of coffee took over the kitchen, the voices of the neighbors echoed through the corridors of the building. But for Linda, every detail seemed magnified. The sound of the water in the tap, the noise of the toaster, even the click of the lock when locking the door of the apartment seemed to mark a different rhythm, a rhythm that pushed her to a line from which there would be no return. On the way to church, while driving with her hands firmly on the wheel, she looked at Emily in the rearview mirror from time to time. The girl fiddled with the sleeves of her coat, smoothing the fabric as if seeking comfort in something concrete. Linda felt a tightness in her chest, but remained silent. Deep down, I knew that this would be a decisive day. She didn't know yet what she would discover. She didn't know how she would react, but she was sure of one thing. She was no longer willing to just imagine. The time had come to face whatever was hidden behind that door. When he parked the car on the side street, his heart was pounding, but curiously, his mind was clearer. There was fear, yes, but there was also focus. She took a deep breath, turned off the engine and, for a few seconds, held the steering wheel tightly, as if she needed that contact to stay firm. Then he hung up his cell phone, called again, just to make sure everything worked well, checking once again as if checking a rope before crossing a bridge. That Sunday, Linda woke up with the firm decision to put the plan into practice. And though she didn't know it yet, every step she took inside that church would bring her closer, little by little, to the truth that for so long they had tried to hide behind walls, smiles, and soft hymns. When she left the church that day, when she heard, behind the door, every word the deacon said to Emily, Linda knew that nothing would ever be the same. The drive home seemed longer than ever. The streets of Dallas, which she had been walking for years, seemed strange, as if everything had moved around. Emily was in the passenger seat, quiet, hugging her own backpack, looking out the window without actually seeing anything. Linda drove in silence, her hands firmly on the wheel, but inside her whole body trembled. When she parked in front of the building, she saw Karen's car stopped a few meters ahead. Her sister had rushed from Houston after hearing Linda's broken voice over the phone, telling her what she had discovered, what she had heard, what she feared. When Emily got out of the car, Karen greeted her with a firm hug, one of those who say a lot without needing words. Linda then explained that she needed to solve an urgent matter and asked her sister to stay with the girl, to keep her busy, to let her feel safe inside the apartment. Emily tried to ask what was going on, but Linda just ran her hand over her daughter's face and said that for now, she just needed to rest, take a hot shower, maybe watch some cartoon. The girl nodded, though there was still fear in her eyes. He entered the building holding hands with his aunt, while Linda, outside, squeezed her cell phone so hard that her knuckles turned white. The device kept the audio she had partially heard, the audio that contained the phrases that marked her soul like a cut. Favorite girl. Secret of special encounters. No one needs to know. The other children would not understand. These were too many words to ignore. Words that crossed any excuse, any beautiful speech. It was confirmation that her instinct was right from the start. And now, that little device was the bridge between fear and justice. Instead of going up, Linda went back to the car. She sat down, took a deep breath, started the engine and headed towards the police station in the area, a light-walled building that she knew by sight, but which she had never entered. During the journey, a series of thoughts ran over each other in the mind. She wondered if she would be believed, if the audio would be clear enough, if anyone would try to protect the deacon based on his reputation. At the same time, another, firmer voice repeated, "You have no choice. If not now, when?" When she arrived, she parked, stood for a few seconds with her hands still on the wheel, trying to find the strength to take the next step. Finally, he turned off the car, put his cell phone in his bag, closed his eyes for a moment, and murmured in silence, something that was not exactly a prayer, but a request for courage. Then he got off, crossed the parking lot, and pushed the glass door of the police station. The atmosphere there was simple, with plastic chairs lined up and a counter where an attendant asked what was the reason for each person's visit. When it was her turn, Linda felt her voice crack a little, but she forced herself to speak clearly. He said that he needed to report something very serious involving a member of a church, something related to the safety of children. The attendant changed her expression, called a more experienced police officer, and in a few minutes Linda was sitting in a smaller, light-walled room with a table and 2 chairs. The policeman asked her to tell everything from the beginning. It wasn't easy. Remembering every detail was like reliving every pain. She spoke of the first signs, of Emily's desperate request to get out of the choir, of the locked doors, of her daughter's cold hand, of the word secret, of the sleepless nights. Finally, he took his cell phone out of his bag, put it on the table, and said that there was an excerpt of what had happened in the basement of the church that Sunday. The policeman connected the device to a small speaker and pressed play. With each second of the audio, his expression changed. He turned a little pale, frowned, looked at Linda, and paid attention again. When the recording got to the point where the deacon said that Emily was the favorite girl and that the meetings were a secret of their own, the room seemed to get even colder. After the playback, there was a heavy silence, broken only by the distant sound of a phone ringing in some other corner of the police station. The policeman took a deep breath and in a serious voice explained that it was, indeed, serious. He asked Linda to formalize the complaint in writing, telling everything, recording dates, approximate times, names of people who could confirm parts of the story. She wrote with trembling hands, but without hesitation. Each word put on paper was like a way to clean some of the dirt she felt around her own life. When he finished, the police officer said that from then on, the case would be forwarded to the department specialized in crimes against children and adolescents. The following weeks were a strange mix of movement and waiting. Investigators got in touch, asked to listen to Emily carefully in a prepared environment, with professionals trained to deal with children. The girl said little, but enough. He confirmed the sentences, the fear, the feeling that something was wrong, although he didn't understand exactly what. Gradually, other families were called. At first, some resisted, defended the deacon, said he was incapable of anything wrong. But as time went by, more reports emerged. Other girls, similar ages to Emily, began to tell about closed-door rehearsals, about invitations to special dates, about exaggerated compliments, about touches that looked like affection, but left a strange feeling on the skin. What for some had started as just the fear of Emily turned out to be a pattern that had probably dragged on for years, hidden behind the mask of a respected man and a supposedly untouchable environment. The news inevitably reached the church. At first, there was incredulity, passionate defenses, speeches about attacks and misunderstandings. But with each testimony that emerged, with each evidence collected, the image of the deacon was undone. Still, Linda knew that for many, it would be difficult to face the truth until something concrete happened before their eyes. And that moment came on a Sunday that no one there would ever forget. The service went on as usual. The pastor preached, the choir sang, families were distributed in the pews, children were handling the pages of the hymn book. Linda was sitting there next to Emily and Karen, her heart beating in a ragged rhythm. She had been warned that something might happen that day, but she didn't know exactly when or how. The tension was so great that sometimes she had to remember to take a deep breath so she wouldn't feel the world spin. Then in the middle of a hymn, the side door of the temple opened and some policemen entered, discreet but firm. They walked down the central corridor under the astonished gaze of all. Some whispered, others looked at each other, not understanding. The agents stopped exactly in the row where Deacon Mark sat, a little ahead, with his wife and children. One of them called his name in a low but audible voice. The hall, which seconds before had been filled with music, plunged into almost absolute silence. Linda felt her blood run cold. Emily grabbed her mother's arm tightly, cowering against her. The police explained that they had an arrest warrant. Mark's wife was in shock. The children were crying, and he seemed unable to react for a few moments. Then he tried to say that there was some mistake, that everything would be clarified. But the handcuffs were already being placed on his wrists, right there, in front of all those who, for years, had called him an example. Some people began to cry. Others to murmur loose phrases about betrayal, disappointment, incredulity. The pastor, not knowing where to put his hands, tried to organize a prayer, but the atmosphere was one of dismantling. Linda, on the other hand, could not take her eyes off her daughter. He wrapped Emily in a hug so tight that it seemed to want to be a shield against the whole world. He felt the girl tremble, crying silently against her mother's chest. At that moment, relief and pain came together. Relief to know that he would no longer touch his daughter or any other child in that church. Pain to see so clearly that the threat she felt was real, so real that she was now being taken out of the temple, handcuffed, under the gaze of an entire congregation. It was a bitter victory, a justice that cost sleepless nights, tears and courage, but it was still justice. When the door closed behind the officers and Mark, the silence remained for a few eternal seconds. Then someone began to cry louder. Another person tried to sing a hymn, as if seeking support in the ancient words that spoke of protection and truth. Linda, however, remained there, hugging her daughter, feeling her heart still in pieces, but for the first time in a long time, breathing without that suffocating pressure in her chest. With the deacon out of the church, a new phase began. It was not the end of the pain, nor the end of the questions, but it was the beginning of reconstruction, of trying to put the pieces together, to learn to breathe without fear. And at the beginning of the path, a certainty was firm in Linda. As scary as it had been, she had done what needed to be done, not only for Emily, but for all children who, like her, depend on adults who have the courage to face what others don't want to see. Linda and Emily's story, from then on, was not limited to the crime and punishment of one man. It has spread in waves through the heart of the community, leaving marks but also seeds of change. The congregation, accustomed to seeing in the figure of the deacon a mirror of trust, had to learn to look beyond titles and smiles, understanding that evil is also hidden in environments considered sacred. Not everyone accepted this immediately, but the shock was strong enough to break blind certainties. In the days following her arrest, Linda noticed that people began to approach her in very different ways. Some came to her with tears in their eyes, apologizing for having doubted, for having thought she exaggerated, for not having paid attention to the signs that they also saw in their own children, but that they preferred to ignore. Even the pastor, who had at first urged caution, came to her, his face marked by a mixture of shame and sadness, saying that he had regretted not having listened more seriously to the first complaints. It wasn't easy for Linda to deal with it. On the one hand, I felt a little bitterness for having been so lonely at first, for having been treated as someone who saw problems where there was none. On the other hand, she knew that being trapped in the revolt would not help in what really mattered, the recovery of her daughter and the protection of the other children. So he chose something difficult but necessary, to forgive, even if gradually, and to transform his own pain into an instrument of warning. Emily, in turn, began to attend a child therapist recommended by the department that handled the case in the police. The first sessions were silent. The girl drew a lot. Sometimes she scribbled scenes of a church, a corridor, a door. The therapist interpreted carefully, without forcing her to speak ahead of time. Over time, Emily put into words what she had felt. The confusion, the fear, the feeling that if she told everything, maybe no one would believe her. Linda followed this process from a distance, sitting in the waiting room, listening to the ticking of a clock on the wall, and thinking about how many other mothers at that moment were in similar rooms, in different cities, trying to heal wounds that should never have been opened. This perception that she was not alone began to grow when she started participating in support groups for mothers and fathers of children who were victims of similar situations. In simple meetings, in community center rooms, or in churches that were also seeking to transform themselves, Linda heard stories that, although different in circumstances, had a common thread: an adult in a position of power, a frightened child, an environment of trust that becomes a scenario of fear. There, among plastic chairs, coffee cups, and crumpled tissues, she shared what she had experienced, not as someone who had all the answers, but as someone who knew exactly the weight of distrust, of acting, and of facing the incredulity of others. In the Lakewood Church itself, changes began to be made, some at the initiative of the leadership, others by the natural pressure of the community, and even by legal guidelines. It was decided that no child would be alone with an adult in any activity anymore. Rooms began to be used with open doors or with glass windows that allowed constant viewing. Choir rehearsals were always done with more than one responsible person present, preferably including women and, when possible, guest parents. These measures, which to some might seem exaggerated, for Linda were the minimum necessary. It was not a matter of living in fear, but of understanding that trust cannot be blind, that prudence is not a lack of faith, and that questioning certain situations does not mean attacking the church, but rather protecting it from the inside out. Gradually, even those who initially resisted the changes began to understand that they were, in fact, a concrete form of care. As the months passed, Linda was invited to speak at small gatherings of women from the congregation itself and from other churches in the area. At first, she was reluctant. He did not see himself as a speaker, nor as an example of anything. It was just a mother who had done her best for her daughter. But when she realized that her story could help other women not to doubt themselves, she accepted. In each meeting, she repeated with simplicity the phrase that became a kind of summary of everything she experienced. If a mother's heart tightens, listen. Better to appear exaggerated than to shut up too late. And this phrase, spoken in a firm voice and sometimes teary eyes, echoed differently in each listener. Some mothers remembered situations they had missed. Others thought of signs that, at that moment, perhaps needed to be taken more seriously. In all of them, however, a new awareness was ignited. The maternal instinct is not madness, it is not drama, it is not exaggeration. It is a kind of silent wisdom that often sees the truth before the eyes become accustomed to it. Years later, when the initial storm had already turned into a less cutting memory, Linda and Emily's story lived on, not because of the pain, but because of the strength it awakened in them and in so many other women. The deacon, at the end of the process, was convicted and was serving a sentence far from there, without the right to exercise any function related to children. On paper, justice had been served. In practice, the most powerful effect was on the hearts that had learned not to be silent. Emily has grown up. He entered adolescence, then youth, bringing with him some invisible marks, but also a strength that perhaps he would not have developed otherwise. She learned from her mother's example that her own voice had value, that her discomfort deserved to be heard, that no title, no position, no kind appearance should be placed above the safety of a child. Linda, in turn, learned that a mother's love, when she refuses to be blind, can change not only the destiny of a girl, but the course of an entire community. Linda never entered that church like before. That place of wooden benches, colorful stained glass windows, and soft hymns now carried a different weight in her heart. Still, every time I drove my car by, looking at the simple tower against the Dallas sky, I felt not only pain, but also a strange sense of silent victory. She remembered the first time she saw Deacon Mark take Emily into the basement, the heavy door closing, the sound of the lock turning, the muffled laughter she couldn't understand. At that time, she thought she was exaggerating, that it was just a concern of a single mother trying to protect her only daughter too much. Today, after the denunciation, the arrest and the whole storm, she knew it was not an exaggeration. It was instinct. Emily, over the years, grew up. The church changed the rules. The community learned a hard lesson, and the deacon ended up condemned far from there, without the right to touch any child. But what marked Linda most was not the sentence on paper. It was the way her daughter, in her teens, still held her hand in difficult moments and said quietly, "Mum, thank you for believing in me." These simple words were worth more than any excuse the congregation could give. Some nights were still heavy. Linda would lie down and remember the sound of his voice saying that Emily was special and that no one needed to know about the dates. The body reacted. A chill ran down the spine, the chest tightened. Then she took a deep breath and recalled another memory. Her at the police station, with her cell phone in her hands, the recording playing, the serious expression of the policeman changing as she heard each sentence. That moment when the truth came out of my head and became proof was the watershed between fear and action. Over time, Linda began to tell her story in small gatherings of women. Nothing grandiose, no huge audience. There were simple rooms, plastic chairs, freshly brewed coffee, the smell of cake coming out of the kitchen. She looked at the tired, attentive faces of other mothers and grandmothers and counted step by step from the first lump in her throat to the day she saw the handcuffs close. Not to relive the pain, but to leave a certainty. If something seems strange to your daughter, don't be afraid to ask again, look again, investigate again. Emily also found a way to move on. She did not sing in that choir again, but discovered years later a new group in another community, this time with clear rules, open doors, several women helping. Linda, sitting in the back, with her hands still marked by the past, smiled when she saw her daughter on stage, safe owner of her own voice. This story, which began with a simple request from a 10-year-old girl to leave the choir, ended with a mother who chose to listen, act, and confront an entire system on behalf of a single child. And that's why, at the end of this account, there is a silent invitation to those who listen. Never underestimate what a mother's heart is capable of seeing before everyone else. Don't go out. Take the next step in this journey by watching the channel's next video, which will appear on your screen. In it, other stories will show once again how love and courage can change entire destinies. A big hug, and see you in the next exciting story.